Like a robot programmed to do one thing, suddenly asked to do a different thing, Donald Trump is short-circuiting before our very eyes. His inability to pivot or adjust to running against Vice President Kamala Harris and the Harris era of the 2024 presidential campaign is obvious every time he opens his mouth or takes to his social media platforms. And just so you're aware, he will be opening his mouth again this afternoon at any minute, actually at a different house this time, Bedminster, New Jersey. They are calling it a press conference, his second in as many weeks, and if today's event is anything like last or his so-called economic messaging event yesterday, then you can understand why we're choosing not to broadcast it here in real time. We will, of course, monitor it and pass along anything news-related and true, because inevitably Donald Trump's public appearances have been less about the issues and the news lately, as if they ever were, and more about threats and lies and demeaning people. And, you know, his current advisors are pleading with him to stay on message, whatever that means. So what did Trump do today? He hired some of the Wayback crew. That includes, among others, former advisor Corey Lewandowski, the man who coined the phrase, "Let Trump be Trump." Joining our conversation, President and CEO of Voto Latino, MSNBC contributor Maria Teresa Kumar, plus political strategist and MSNBC senior analyst Matt Dowd is back. Matt Dowd, I wanted to pick up on the conversation we started this week about the way the race has been reshaped. There is so much evidence that that is the case, and it doesn't matter who the sort of pollster or the data is being collected for, right? Whether it's a poll that typically focuses on swing states or Democratic states or a certain demographic or women or young people or Gen X or Gen Y or Gen Z or whatever it is, they all show the same direction, right? That Vice President Harris has reset the race and that Donald Trump is now today, and we should say 83 days is an eternity, but today the race has been reshaped and Vice President Harris has some momentum and enthusiasm. What are you watching now, Matt? I mean, what are the things that are legitimate political news over the next 83 days?
That's a very good question. So I'll add one thing that I actually think the starting of the resetting of the race was Joe Biden's decision, which then put the vice president in the decision to take advantage of that decision, which completely reset the vibe. And it was an earthquake in our political system. And I don't think Donald Trump and his folks know how to deal with that earthquake in our political system. To me, we're at a point, the timing of this, I mean, it's almost as if it's a perfect storm on behalf of Vice President Harris against Donald Trump in everything that's happened. And then we're about to go into this convention period, which the vice president will come out of with my expectation is a pretty solid 4 or 5 point lead when she leaves that convention, which is significant in an environment where races are decided by 5 or 6 points. That is a significant movement in this. To me, it's not going to be about advertising, even though there's going to be a ton of advertising. And it's not going to be really about, 22 visits to a given state, though those are important. To me, this race, in order for Donald Trump to get back in this race and to reset the psychic nature of this race to his advantage, it has to be a big, huge moment. And either it's external, which we're unaware of, so we can't predict those. And the only ones that we can predict that could reset the race possibly are the debates. That's what's left, I think, to really fundamentally shift the race to a disadvantage of Vice President Harris. And one thing I think people have forgotten, and we talked about this a little bit, but I want to recall this, is that Donald Trump's staying power of popularity and significance with the public, his life it's always shown it wanes. And I'll give you the perfect example, The Apprentice. The Apprentice in year one had 20 million people that viewed it. It was new, it was funny, it was entertaining. Donald Trump had his shtick. By year 4 of The Apprentice, it was down to 10 million viewers. By year 7 or 8, The Apprentice shtick had worn off and it was less than 5 million people were watching The Apprentice and Donald Trump. That's the situation he is in because he is old shtick and everything he seems to say and do is 2016, 2020, it's all old. And what Vice President Harris is an opening brand new series, which none of us have ever seen before, and are watching it unfold in real time while we have this old shtick, a rerun on Nickelodeon that's still ongoing, that still says the same thing. And that's why, to me, the last elements of really fundamentally shifting this race are the debates.
Maria Teresa Kumar, you know data, you know politics, and you know the country. And I think it's what Matt said, plus it's the collective PTSD. It's we live in a country where to save women from the fate, the likes of which Amanda Zarowski endured, where she almost died because she was pregnant with a non-viable pregnancy. She has become a person in the political arena talking about the consequences of what Donald Trump did. Donald Trump picked people who would overturn Roe versus Wade. The country has been through something traumatic. He was unrepentant about his failures around COVID. I mean, I'm not sure that he couldn't have done himself some political good by pretending to care that millions of people died. It was both his failures and his indifference to the suffering and the tragedy and the collective loss and the grief that people are still processing. So I think it's more than being tired and old and no one's watching anymore. I think she's speaking to not just exhaustion, but to our desire to pick ourselves up from all of these blows and sort of make a turn towards something more positive and more hopeful.
Nicole, I think that that's exactly what the American people are thinking about right now, because it wasn't just COVID, it was pre-COVID. There was not a moment when any of us would wake up in the morning and said, oh my gosh, what did he tweet now? There wasn't a moment where if you were an African American, you felt like the police was watching you and that you didn't have someone to actually have your back. There wasn't a moment being a Latino under Trump where you did not fear that when you get home, you were going to be racially profiled, or if you were undocumented, that your loved one may not be there. There wasn't a moment where we all didn't feel tense and we weren't sure if our neighbor had our back. And what Kamala Harris has been able to do with Tim Walz is beautifully remind us that we are a joyful people, that we are a loving people, that we do care about each other, and that we do want to close a chapter on a dark period. Because what Donald Trump reminded us is that there's still deep racism and division in this country, but they are the last gasp. The fact that we have the evangelical community coming out, that we have the white dudes for Kamala Harris, we have every spectrum and different groups of people saying this is who we actually are. We are a multicultural America that when we come together with very clear-eyed of what our difficulties are, but with a plan to move us forward, we are unstoppable. One of the things that President Biden has always says at the end of the day is that we are America, damn it. We can do whatever we set our minds to. And he's reminding us with the choice of Kamala Harris and with Tim Walz that is actually true. This is not AI-generated crowds that you see. You see real enthusiasm. And I have to share with you, in the work that we're doing, in the last 10 days, we've seen a surge in young voters saying we want to re-register, we want to get back in the game, we want to drive the agenda. And if you want to look at the polling does not include newly registered voters. And it doesn't necessarily always highlight the independents that are moving. And so even in Ohio, where they're saying that she's down, I would actually encourage us to think that she might be up because of the young voters. In Arizona alone, Biden won that state by 10,700 votes. My organization so far, we've already registered over 13,000 of them that are newly registered voters, right? So we're exceeding those margins already. And we don't expect this type of movement until post-Labor Day, post the DNC conventions, the RNC conventions. So the momentum is absolutely there. And the only thing that I would alert the public to is that there is an effort on the other side to continue cheating. And by cheating, what I mean is that they are actively purging folks on the voter file. So if there's any public service announcement that I encourage folks to do is make sure that even though you voted last time, make sure that you're still valid on that voter file because there's plenty of time to register.
She's going to make one hell of a president. That's quite the endorsement from the man who worked alongside Vice President Harris for 4 years. Today, President Biden and Vice President Harris appeared together for the first time since she became the Democratic presidential nominee.
Folks, I have an incredible partner. The progress we've made She's going to make one hell of a president.
Vice President Harris and President Biden reunited to celebrate the progress that their administration has made, including the billions of dollars Americans are now expected to save on prescription drugs thanks to the provisions in the Inflation Reduction Act. The Biden administration announced today, quote, because Medicare is now able to negotiate lower prescription drug prices for seniors and people with disabilities, American taxpayers are expected to save $6 billion on prescription drug costs, and people enrolled in Medicare are expected to save $1.5 billion in out-of-pocket costs in 2026 alone. Thousands of supporters stood in long lines hoping to make their way into the venue to see President Biden and Vice President Harris at Prince George's County Community College in Maryland. Hundreds of people had to be turned away because the facility was filled to capacity. The crowd inside broke out into chants of, "Thank you, Joe," after the vice president took time to praise President Biden.
I could speak all afternoon about the person that I am standing on this stage with. Joe Biden. And he's going to speak in a minute, but there's a lot of love in this room for our president. And I think it's for many, many reasons, including few leaders in our nation have done more on so many issues, including to expand access to affordable health care than Joe Biden. And today we take the next step, thank you, Joe, forward in our fight.
Now, for his part, he may be out of the running, but President Biden used the opportunity to take some swipes at his one-time opponent.
We finally beat Big Pharma. And I might add, with no help from Republicans, not a single Republican voted for this bill, period, not one in the entire Congress. The guy we're running against, what's his name? Donald Dump or Donald, whatever. They want to get rid of this, what we passed. They're fighting to get rid of what we've just passed. No, I'm serious. No help from Republicans passing the Inflation Reduction Act, thanks to the tie-breaking vote of Kamala, made it possible.
In a video released by the Harris campaign, Vice President Harris and her running mate, Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota, discuss why programs that Republicans want to cut, like Social Security, are so important.
After he died, my mom was a stay-at-home mom. She became our rock, and now she had to go out and get work because the medical bills broke her. And Social Security and Social Security survivor benefits. We're fine pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps. We had no boots. That's the boots. So programs that are just fundamental to keeping people from dropping into poverty, but to live with dignity. You keep talking about that.
We can't have a country and policies that let people fall through the cracks.
Yeah.
Vice President Harris will release her own economic policy agenda tomorrow in North Carolina. Elsewhere today, J.D. Vance agreed to debate Tim Walz on October 1st. The debate will be moderated by CBS News, but other networks like this one will be able to air it. The Harris campaign said in a statement, quote, Governor Walz looks forward to debating J.D. Vance if he shows up. Every day since Donald Trump chose him as his running mate, more of J.D. Vance's weird and archaic views on women have come into clearer focus. Last night, he suggested that caring about reproductive rights isn't normal.
All these suburban women, all they care about is abortion, and they don't understand that decision is with the states now. It's not banned nationally, even if some people want it to be banned nationally. It's with the states. What do you say to suburban women out there who are marinating in this propaganda?
Well, first of all, I don't buy that, Laura. I think most suburban women care about the normal things that most Americans care about, right?
The normal things. Today, Donald Trump held, can't really call it a press conference. The Harris-Walz campaign is calling it Trump's whatever that was. Harsh, but fair, honestly. Once again, Donald Trump spiraled in front of a group of reporters. This is the second time now in 2 weeks. He attacked Vice President Harris with lies at his golf resort in New Jersey instead of his home in Florida. Donald Trump said that he was entitled to attack Kamala Harris, but that's not sitting well with some members of his own party. The Washington Post's Aaron Blake writes, quote, recent days have featured a familiar sight, a coterie of Trump allies taking to broadcast outlets such as Fox News, seemingly to send a message to Trump in the apparent belief that this is how you get through to the cable news junkie former president. They've practically begged him to change it up. They've sought to push him away from talk of crowd size and personal attacks on Harris and toward policy. But whether because he refuses to or he can't, the message is going unheeded by the so-called audience of one. So, how's Trump trying to resurrect his struggling campaign? By hiring the man he fired as his campaign manager in 2016, Corey Lewandowski. With 82 days left until Election Day, President Biden is offering up this advice. Beat the hell out of them.
Get this. You may have heard about the MAGA Republican Project 2025 plan. They want to repeal Medicare's power to negotiate drug prices. Let Big Pharma back to charge them whatever they want. Let me tell you what our Project 2025 is. Beat the hell out of them. I mean it.
And we begin tonight with damning new video from a former Trump cabinet member and key Project 2025 architect, Russell Vought, who confirms what we all know, that Donald Trump has personally had talks with Vought about his work behind Project 2025, and Trump gave him his blessing.
It's interesting. He's in fact not even opposing himself to a particular policy. Yeah. He's been at our organization. He's raised money for our organization. He's blessed it from the, I remember walking into our last day in office and told him what I was going to do. So he's very supportive of what we do.
This new audio comes from two investigative reporters with the nonprofit Center for Climate Reporting, who secretly recorded a nearly 2-hour conversation with Vought, who thought he was meeting with some high-dollar donors, which in and of itself is problematic in what it implies about the potential selling of access to an American administration. And while Vought currently runs his own think tank, he previously served as the policy director for the Republican National Convention Committee and recently helped to rewrite the official party platform. And he's been a huge Project 2025 promoter. Publicly, Trump will tell anyone who listens that he has no idea what this thing is.
I don't know what the hell it is. It's Project 25. He's involved in Project, and then they read some of the things, and they are extreme. I mean, they're seriously extreme. But I don't know anything about it. I don't want to know anything about it.
Those denials seem real dishonest, given what Vought told those two reporters, and given the fact that nearly 140 individuals who worked in the Trump administration are affiliated with Project 2025. But here's what's really concerning. The Trump conservatives have a secret plan that they've intentionally been hiding. The reporters with the Center for Climate Reporting also spoke with another Project 2025 author and Vought aide, who admitted that there is a secretive second phase of Project 2025 that is supervised by Vought. Apparently, the Heritage Foundation has a giant policy packet filled with executive orders and agenda items that will be handed to Trump administration officials on day one.
Yeah, the goal is familiarize all the transition team people with these plans, but you don't actually send them to their work emails, because then, then they go out.
Politico has reported that Vogt is in close contact with Trump, speaking with him once a month. And according to Vogt himself, he also speaks with the campaign. Vogt also has been mentioned as a possible chief of staff in a second Trump administration. If Trump wins in November, what Vogt and Project 2025 fanatics have in store is the complete upending of American society. Here he is explaining what his think tank, the Center for Renewing America, which alongside the Heritage Foundation has been at the heart of Project 2025, promotes.
An organization that I helped turn into the Death Star that is accomplishing all the debates that you are reading about. I think you have to rehabilitate Christian nationalism. You have the largest deportation in history, block funding for Planned Parenthood. I want to be the person that crushes the deep state.
When asked what would happen if people took to the streets in protest, he told the reporters that Trump would deploy the military to silence the unrest. Think about that for a second. These are the core philosophies of the MAGA Republican Party. And it should come as no surprise that J.D. Vance was embraced by Vogt, given that he shares the same beliefs.
So I am very happy with the JD pick. I think it's transformative for sure. And he's, think of him as a member version of what we do. So there's no think tank, no policy organization, no battle plan creator other than us for the worldview that I think Donald Trump has and that JD has.
Joining me now is David Jolly, MSNBC political analyst and former Republican congressman who's no longer affiliated with the party, and Angelo Carusone, president and CEO of Media Matters. Angelo, I do want to start with you. That second clip, this is the aide to Mr. Vogt. He said that they have a second set of policy proposals and instructions that they would give to members of a second Trump administration, but not email it to them. And he said the reason for that is that if you emailed it to their official emails, one could file a FOIA. The media and people like you, sir, could potentially file Freedom of Information Act requests and get copies of those instructions. That, to me, is one of the most chilling things that I heard, that they've got these secret plans they want to keep away from the media. For you, what's the most chilling stuff that you heard?
The fact that he's already done something like this, but on a smaller scale. So in the first 6 months of 2021, more than 20 states had either legislation or executive orders that banned teaching critical race theory in schools. We went back and looked at those states that did that. The overwhelming majority of the states that implemented that work were directly based off of the model language, the model legislation, and the model executive orders that Russell Vogt's new organization had drafted at the time. And so if you take what he did then and you apply that to the conversation he just had, and that's what we've been warning about, is that 900-page policy book was sort of just put everything on the table, all the ideas, all the things they wanted. But the 180-day agenda, the document that he referenced there, the thing that he is drafting as a part of this Project 2025 initiative, is sort of the bundle of things to implement, the executive orders, the directives at the various departments. It is the step-by-step plan for implementing all of the extremist, all of the authoritarian parts of Project 2025. And because he's already demonstrated the ability to do this at a small scale, and that they know they have to do this in the shadows, that, to your point, is extraordinarily chilling.
Yeah, and I mean, David, I think one of the points that we really want to try to make to people as they think about Project 2025 is that Project 2025 is the nationalization of policy ideas that are already being experimented on in red states. So there's already a Project 2025 operating in the state of Texas, where they've got few abortion rights, where women have fewer rights than men, where rape victims have almost no rights, where people who are having ectopic pregnancies have no rights, have to leave the state. States like Idaho, states like Iowa, states like Florida, states like Louisiana are already living under a version of this. They just want to nationalize the things that Ron DeSantis, for instance, is doing, taking over businesses, suing businesses who won't comply on speech issues, taking away critical race theory, taking away affirmative action, taking away DEI, and turning the state essentially into sort of white nationalist heaven or hell, depending on which side you're on. They're already doing it. They just want to do it on a national level.
They are. And I think it's easy to look at Project 2025 and sometimes say, oh, it's just a robust contract with America, this hard right conservative wonky agenda for every department and every agency in the federal government. And in some ways, it includes that. But I think what you heard in those tapes is the admission, and in his words, it is also to rehabilitate Christian nationalism.
Yes.
And if there's an ethos behind all of this, that is in some ways the most dangerous part of Project 2025, because that is the culture war part of this. You can have the wonky debates about no government, less government, big government. Certainly it matters and it impacts people, certainly marginalized communities. But this notion that Project 2025 under a Trump administration would rehabilitate Christian nationalism, you might as well put in the parenthetical white Christian nationalism, and you get the policies you just described, Joy, from book burning to taking away healthcare decisions from families, to telling teachers what they can teach and what they can't teach, to the war on migrant communities, communities of color, the disenfranchisement of people's vote and their own democracy. All of these things are an advancement of white Christian nationalism. And the one thing we know about Donald Trump is not only does he believe that, does he curry favor with that, but he sees that as a strategy for leading the country, but also for winning this election. That's the danger. And honestly, that should be the motivation to beat this back at the ballot box and finally quiet these forces in American politics.
Absolutely. I mean, Angelo, there's a part in this conversation he's having with these two people he thinks are donors where he talks about their massive deportation plan. And he says, we're going to do mass deportation. And then he goes from that to saying mass deportation will help us get rid of multiculturalism. We'll just deport all of these brown people, then we'll get rid of multiculturalism. And then he goes directly from there to the thing that David just said. He says we then need to reintroduce and sort of, change the vision of Christian. He first says nationism, and then he says nationalism, and he says Christian nationalism. So there's a direct through line in their mind to making America whiter, to taking away women's reproductive rights, to force women that are here already to have children, and getting rid of multiculturalism, and then adding Christian nationalism. To them, they're all one policy.
It is one policy, and that's right. And if you look at the work that he's done, I mean, he's written about this publicly, he's talked about this publicly, he's been a big advocate for Christian nationalism. And then beyond that, when you get into the mass deportation side of it, the flip side of that is when you start to look into some of the stuff he's written, some of the stuff in Project 2025, some of the stuff in the Center for Renewing America, you find out that they want to then change the way immigration is done to essentially privilege Christian immigrants, so that they would make that one of the key factors for getting into the country, for allowing for immigration. So on the one hand, they're pushing out and they're getting rid of multiculturalism. On the other hand, then they're flooding the zone with sort of white Christians. And that's the flip side of all of this, is that they have a plan on both ends of this. And one of the things that disturbs me is that when you think about the Supreme Court decision that just came out that granted immunity to presidents, it actually reduces and gets rid of some of the friction in the system that made it hard, that would have made it harder for them, at least a little bit, to implement some of the extremist policies they need in order to execute this, which is actually using the military to both quell and suppress any protests, and also simultaneously to execute and implement a lot of the deportations that he's talking about. So a lot of these things became a lot more possible and real in the last few months because of decisions that the Supreme Court has made.
Yeah, absolutely. They're making a unitary executive, which is a long-standing conservative theory that George W. Bush, for instance, used to execute, to implement incredible power, power from the presidency after 9/11. They believe that this president should have superpowers, and so does John Roberts.
Wow, school lunch is up 65%. How can a family afford that? But look at this over here. What a nice job. I think I'm going to take some of them back to my cottage and have a lot of fun. Like the Cheerios. I haven't seen Cheerios in a long time. I'm going to take them back with me. Bacon is through the roof. They're all through the roof. The milk.
That was millionaire Donald Trump doing the Price is Right routine with a bunch of prop groceries set up in front of his private country club today, ranting about the cost of stuff again and trying to tell everyone that the American economy is in shambles, all while the stock market rocketed through 40,000 at the same time on the lower right side of the screen. That there, the Cheerios riff, is Trump on message, which is something his aides have been begging for, like he was supposed to be yesterday in another rambling economy speech. Trump very weirdly tried to claim credit for something Joe Biden definitely did as president, saying that he's the one who did the insulin.
Kamala and Joe tried to take credit for $35 insulin. You know that. You know who did that? I did that. I did the insulin, and it kicked in. And, you know, I remember when I did it, it had to be a statute. It was a certain statute that took a certain period of time. I said, I hope I'm elected because somebody's going to get a lot of credit for doing what I got done.
What are you talking about, my man? Obviously not true. Either lying or confused or some combination of the two. Because check this out. Here's Joe Biden signing that piece of legislation, a part of the Inflation Reduction Act, which, with no Republican votes, that gave Medicare the power to bargain down the price of a growing list of prescription drugs. Insulin was just the first of many. And in fact, today, the Biden-Harris administration announced 10 more drugs would be reduced in price under the plan, drugs that are taken by about 10 million Medicare recipients altogether. In fact, the White House says these 10 drugs are among those with highest total spending in Medicare Part D. Next year, whoever's in the White House will announce another 15 drugs to be discounted under the negotiating plan. Senator Amy Klobuchar, Democrat of Minnesota, has been championing this legislation for literally years, and she joins us now. And since you have been championing it, I just want to make sure I haven't lost my mind. Donald Trump had nothing to do with this, right? He didn't do the insulin while I was not paying attention somehow?
Well, first of all, the words "I did insulin" it was a little alarming. And then when you look through it, he did claim credit for the $35 cap, which is a complete and utter falsehood. Back in 2020, he did some kind of volunteer program, a voluntary program, not in statute. And there was just a PolitiFact fact check on this a few weeks back, and it found his claims to be false. Why? Because, as you said, Joe Biden and the Biden-Harris administration got this done. Not only did they get that $35 cap in place that has also helped people who aren't seniors because it forced the drug companies to voluntarily offer it to people who aren't seniors and made a huge impact. The other piece of it is that he got these 10 drugs. As you point out, Eliquis, over 3 million seniors take this drug, Chris. And he has gotten these drugs down as a result of finally passing my bill that Donald Trump never got done. We didn't get Republican support for the drug negotiation when we passed it with all Democratic votes. The fact is, there are seniors right now that are going to see a $1.5 billion decrease, in their out-of-pocket costs on just these 10 drugs, Xarelto, Eliquis, Januvia, Jardiance, I've memorized them, and 6 other drugs. That is what we're going to see, and it means a lot to the American people. 15 more next year, 20 more after that, and this was as a result of Biden-Harris administration, Kamala Harris, someone that took on the pharma companies on drug prices back to when she was AG. They're the ones that did it. And once again, we have a rambling Donald Trump press conference at his golf club where it defies the facts. Not true.
Yeah, and you know, I know the cost of prescription drugs are a huge deal for everyone. It always feels like speaking of prices right, it always feels like a lottery. Like you walk up and it's like, I don't know, it's gonna be $10, it could be $180, it'd be $560. Like, do we just spin the wheel? And so this has been a huge deal. But I think the political economy of it and the reason that it's so important, both for what it means for people's pockets, like they're going to pay less for drugs, but also like just tell us a little bit about how long it took to get to this moment, because I have covered this issue for 20 years, and the drug companies obviously don't want it because it's just directly there's the seniors on one side in the government, and there's them on the other side, and they want to charge more.
Completely. So about 20 years ago, they got a sweetheart deal written into law. I wasn't there for this, but they got it written into law that said that seniors, biggest drug buying bloc in the country, are stuck with the prices. So over years, led by myself, led by Bernie Sanders, we have kept pushing this. And at the beginning, I had 8 people on the legislation. Then we added more people. As I said, then Senator Harris was a strong supporter of this bill. We kept adding people, and finally we get to the Inflation Reduction Act. We never got Republicans on the legislation. We finally get to the Inflation Reduction Act. pulled 2 all-nighters to get that done, and we finally get enshrined into law thanks to President Biden and Vice President Harris's leadership. We get enshrined into law the ability to negotiate. Pharma companies had 3 lobbyists for every member of Congress. They were behind every corner in the Capitol, at every cocktail party, and yeah, it was hard. And that did not pass during Donald Trump, nor did the $35 cap on insulin, nor did the $2,000 cap on out-of-pocket expenses that hits in January of next year for our seniors. That all happened because of President Biden and Vice President Harris's leadership.
And just to be clear, again, like this, you guys were flooded by pharma. There was a huge amount of lobbying and money. The deciding vote on this was passed by the vice president. Yeah, the deciding vote on the Inflation Reduction Act was cast by the president. It was signed by President Joe Biden. There were 0 Republican votes for this. And the reason that it's engineered, tell me if I'm wrong, in this way is because it was this, I think, very clever means of sort of finding a workable get to 50 votes way to do this over the opposition of the pharma companies tooth and nail.
Yeah, I mean, I would, right now I have legislation to double the number of drugs that you see these kinds of cost savings, which drugs that are costing people in my state $500-600 a month go down to over $100. It's an unbelievable change on monthly costs. So I think we should be doubling our efforts to get it done. But right now, we must celebrate this incredible accomplishment because the pharma companies are fighting us in court as we speak. There have been 7 rulings on this. They have lost all 7, Chris, including in front of Republican-appointed judges. So they're claiming that we don't even have the right to do this. The Biden-Harris Justice Department has correctly made the case we do, won every single time. So even as we speak, they're fighting to take this down. So I am just very pleased we finally got this done.
That is a great point about whether the Department of Justice continues to stick up for this legislation should a Trump and Republican administration take over. That's something to watch. Senator Amy Klobuchar, thank you very much for your time tonight. Appreciate it.
Donald Trump is always going to go back to his comfort zone: racism and xenophobia. Yesterday, the Trump campaign posted this image online with the caption, "Import the third world, become the third world." It shows a typical suburban home on one side, which is captioned, "Your neighborhood under Trump." And on the other side, there's an image of migrants at a shelter in New York City with the caption, "Your neighborhood under Kamala." Today in The Atlantic, Charlie Sykes wrote about that post, saying, "The Neighborhood Post went beyond Trump's fixation on migrant crime to highlight his campaign's embrace of the Great Replacement theory, the fear that Black and brown migrants will displace white Americans in the voting booth, the workplace, and a neighborhood near you." Joining me now is Charlie Sykes, co-founder and former editor-at-large of The Bulwark. Also with me is Angela Rye, co-host of the podcast The Native Lands Pod and CEO of Impact Strategies and the former executive director and general counsel to the Congressional Black Caucus. Charlie and Angela, it's great to have you here to talk about a really unfortunate sort of, I won't even say development because it's been going on for so long, but reality in the GOP. Charlie, I'd like to start with what you wrote in The Atlantic today. And at one point, Republicans sort of still tried to call this immigration, but it seems so obvious at this point that this really is about the Great Replacement theory. Does it surprise you? And do you think it is at all a liability for voters that Trump is going to have to win in this election?
Well, obviously, he's not trying to persuade swing voters. He's trying to inject more fear and motivation to his base. And I understand that some people will say, well, he's always been doing this. And it's true. He's been playing this card since he came down the golden escalator. And even before that, when he was pushing the birtherism conspiracy theory. But what is striking about this is how blatant the racism is and how, in fact, it comes from the campaign itself. If that post that you were just talking about had appeared on a white nationalist website or a Trump supporter, you could shrug it off. But this is the Trump campaign itself. And I think it's an indication of the way they're amplifying and escalating a message that not that long ago, I think in American politics, we would have recognized as crossing the line of blatant racism. And on Earth 2.0, this would be dominating the news cycle. We'd be talking about Willie Horton on steroids, but because it's Donald Trump, it's just another day that ends with Y. But there's no question that this has become a central theme of his campaign. If you watch any of the ads, if you see the social media, if you listen to Donald Trump, who basically says, well, not basically, he said yesterday that America's become a third world country. This is a constant theme. Now, again, not new for him, but you can tell that he's moving beyond dog whistles to foghorns. And it's not a coincidence that he is trying to tie this carnage to the first black woman candidate for, the possibility of a nominee for president, a woman with a Jamaican and Indian heritage, that he's playing all of these cards. And you're absolutely right. What he's doing, rather than talking about his vision for the future, is he's going back to play his greatest hits or his ugliest hits.
Yeah, and Angela, I'd love to get your thoughts on two aspects of this. One, what Charlie's talking about how running against Kamala Harris has reawoken Trump's worst racist tendencies, but also the sort of even more pernicious element of this, which is he's trying to stoke He's trying to further a racial divide within communities of color, right? By saying black people, these immigrants that are coming over the border trying to steal your jobs. He's using racism to gain favor with a group of people that he has already established himself as having a long and racist record amongst.
Yeah, I think what's hard about this is there is a part of the Black community. There's a part of the brown community. There is a part of Asian Pacific Islander communities that struggle deeply with what is happening in this country. And there are issues that have worked to combat or to traffic in. They're taking your jobs. They're taking your opportunities. They're not paying the same amount of taxes as you, because we're talking about communities of color that have been hurting for hundreds of years. And so what has been a successful tactic for the Republican Party long before Donald Trump is this boogeyman theory. And for the boogeyman theory, sometimes it's an individual and sometimes it's a class of people. In this instance, it is a class of people. We are talking about migrants. That term, third world, is normally used to talk about Asian countries, African countries, and Latin American countries. That is not by mistake. Him saying your neighborhood under me versus your neighborhood under Kamala is not by mistake. That othering he's been doing since birtherism with President Obama is absolutely the thing. You said that he reawakened it. It was never asleep. And the sad part is there are people who are both fans of his and foes who still have that underling of this person that may be getting ahead, even though I've paid my dues, even though I've been here. What we've got to do is address the elephant in the room, and I would dare not call it a boogeyman. The fact is there are people who need to flee political persecution, who need to get out of what is very tricky politics in their countries, and there are folks who are coming here for a better and a brighter day. And there are a bunch of us who don't all agree on immigration. What we know is that Donald Trump's way of doing this is highly dangerous. It is highly violent. We saw it already in his first administration. And we got to be very clear-eyed about the fact that he just doesn't like other. And that is the same thing he did to President Obama.
Yeah, the otherizing is happening across the board everywhere. Yeah. And in this case, he's weaponizing it to stoke racial resentment. I mean, Charlie, when people, it's like there's been this constant drumbeat since Harris ascended to the top of the ticket from the right wing, where folks are saying Donald Trump needs to focus on inflation. He's like standing there with the sweating groceries to his stage right. And yet it's like there's no stopping the essence of Trump, right? Like this is fundamentally who he is. And the hires that the Trump campaign announced today, including bringing back Corey Lewandowski, who literally wrote a book called Let Trump Be Trump, suggests to me that reining this in isn't actually going to be the play heading into November. It feels like it's going to get worse.
No, and your setup really captured the moment, because you look at that scene where he had all of the charts about inflation. That is the message. That is the message that Republicans and professional aides want him to do. What you saw was a Donald Trump who is incapable and completely uninterested in staying on message. What you saw was Trump being Trump. And so, first of all, that was not really a press conference. It was this rambling stream of grievances, insults, fabrications, and gibberish, which we've now gotten for pretty much the last 3 weeks. And I agree with you. I don't see any indication that that's going to change. You can see the campaign trying to make him talk about the economy like they did in North Carolina, like they did today. And he just can't bring himself. One other point. Attorney George Conway just posted a little while ago, that apart from being deranged, Trump is an idiot. For a guy who is supposed to be a successful businessman, his ignorance of basic economics is kind of jaw-dropping, and that was on display as well. And I'm going to be interested to hear, the on-the-record or the off-the-record reaction of Republicans looking at him and going, what are we going to do with this guy? We've bowed the knee to him. We've joined ourselves at the hip with him. Do we really want to put this man back in the Oval Office? Where's he taking us? I think it's pretty clear by now.
Yeah, like his grasp of basic math and the fact that it's hard to...
More than 100%.
The immigrants are taking more than 100% of jobs. He's working on a different, maybe like just a different time-space continuum, a different sort of mathematical set of standards than the rest of us are. But Angela, as he's trying to sort of, to go back to what we were talking about just a second ago, as he's trying to stoke division between lately arrived immigrants to the country and those who have been here longer, especially in communities of color that are slightly more established domestically, he's also undermining that very attempt by taking on the woman who could be the first Black South Asian president of the United States. And the racism isn't even latent. It's explicit. At what point in the press conference, he said that Kamala Harris was unbelievable in terms of her badness. He's called her stupid. He's called her radical. I mean, he talks about her intelligence all the time, trotting out some of the most poisonous tropes about African Americans in this country, a long, long history we have of that, hundreds of years worth. And for Donald Trump, he cannot quit it. And I wonder what you think, whether you think that the whistle is loud enough for everyone to hear at this point.
Charlie said it earlier, and I used to say it all the time during his first campaign, and that is Donald Trump doesn't use a whistle. It is a foghorn. Right. It is signaling to the grossest fears in this country, the very foundation of them. You already mentioned, Alex, this stuff didn't just come out of nowhere. The reason why Black folks were targeted for slavery was because there was this idea that we were somehow more submissive and could be coached into and beat into this because of ignorance. Our brains are smaller, all of that. None of that is true, and all of it is what he plays into. What I think is the truth is Donald Trump deeply fears how brilliant Kamala Harris is. So he's trying to psych himself up for this first debate and the debates to follow. He's trying to challenge her in the press because he knows that he can go on the stage of any campaign rally, any press conference, say whatever he wants. He won't be fact-checked by most networks, right? He's not even fact-checked on the debate stage. The Presidential Commission said, hey, you know what? For those facts, forget about it. It's just entertainment at this point. He knows that if Kamala Harris goes toe-to-toe with him with facts and with her record, that he doesn't have a shot in hell. That is what we're really up against. I think what's scary to me, and Charlie, you mentioned this as well, that Donald Trump is dumb. He's not really very bright. I hate to say it, but it's clear that at least half of the American electorate is right there with him. That is scary, but I think that we would be also very silly, perhaps pretty ignorant, if we turn a blind eye to what happened before. In 2016, that same electorate, at least the Electoral College, thanks to that thing, right? They brought him into the presidency. He got sworn in with that ignorance that he announced his campaign with. The very thing we're talking about today, the very thing this story is about, Charlie, is this xenophobia. He came down the escalator and called Mexicans rapists and drug dealers. That is the same thing he's doing today because it works. So we've got to challenge ourselves about how to make the truth work more than the fiction and the fear.
Yeah, that's so well said. I mean, also, look, demographic change is complicated. Change is complicated. And it's what Trump has done is exploit the fear around change and brought out the worst in the American public in that respect.
And just like that, all of a sudden, Senate Democrats are feeling much better about their chances in November. Because of this year's map, it has been viewed as a long shot for Democrats to hold on to their slim majority. But now, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says not only will they hold on to the majority, he thinks they could even expand it. Just take a look at the newest polls from the Cook Political Report, and you can see why. Democratic Senate candidates are running strong in key swing states. So let's discuss. Joining me tonight, former Democratic Congressman Conor Lamb of Pennsylvania and former Republican Congressman Carlos Curbelo of Florida. Conor, of course, Chuck Schumer is optimistic. He's got to be. It is his job. But do you share his optimism?
I do. I mean, we've seen a reversal of fortune in the last 30 days, unlike anything I can remember that fast. I think largely because Vice President Harris is exciting young people and other voters who were just sitting on the sidelines before. And now that they're getting engaged, they're showing up in polls for Senate candidates, for the presidential, for congressional candidates. And it's just reinvigorating our party because earlier these people were ignoring pollsters or saying that they were disengaged. And that kind of enthusiasm is infectious and it's starting to spread.
Carlos, what do you think? How would you feel if you were on the ballot during this race as a Republican and you're watching Donald Trump's press conferences? How would you feel about what's coming this November?
Well, I just think it's remarkable what Conor just highlighted, how much the script has flipped here in the last few weeks. I mean, it was Democrats just a few weeks ago worried about President Biden being a drag on them, about ruining their chances to take back the House, making it very difficult for them to hold on to the Senate. And now it's just a complete opposite, Steph. And it reminds me of, for example, when I ran in 2018, what Republicans are doing now, begging Donald Trump to stay on message, begging him to talk about inflation, immigration, the issues that could help Republicans. But they're dealing with someone who won't listen, who only pays attention to his own instincts, his own impulses. And clearly what he wants to do is launch personal attacks, ramble through some of these speeches. I mean, this is someone who just a few weeks ago had the opportunity to unite the country. There was a lot of sympathy for him after that horrible assassination attempt, and he has squandered all of that goodwill.
Conor, both candidates are flooding your state, Pennsylvania, with ads and tons of money. More money has been spent there than any other swing state. What do people in PA want to hear right now? What are they telling you?
I think people are feeling a little bit overwhelmed. And so they're not necessarily happy to see $100 million worth of ads. I can tell you that for sure. What's interesting is a lot of the focus from the GOP side is on Vice President Harris. In other words, it's negative advertising using her words and messages, nothing positive about Trump because there's not much to say. I think people are sick of him and he's annoying at this point. I mean, his press conference today was a perfect example. It's the same old lines over and over and over again. And while he was new in 2016 and people in Pennsylvania thought he was going to shake things up, now, you know, the whole thing is tired. And so the more money they spend, they're kind of in a tough spot because they can't really use his act so much anymore. They have to try to go negative on her. And I think that might backfire because every ad they run, they just remind the voters that Vice President Harris comes across as 20 years younger than him. And that seems to be what people want.
Well, let's talk about the words she's using and what she's saying, because the New York Times points out that Harris and Walz are leaning into language that's usually used by Republicans, talking about liberties and freedoms and telling leaders to mind their business when it comes to reproductive freedom. What do you think of that strategy? I mean, small government, don't tread on me. Those are some classic Republican ideas. Carlos?
Well, Steph, yeah, I mean, really, this is a big role reversal here, and it's because Republicans who for a long time were about limited government, about keeping government out of the way, out of the people's homes, out of their bedrooms. Now it's Republicans really pushing intrusive policies, regardless of the issue. But in pursuit of winning the culture wars, Republicans have really tried to impose their way of seeing the world on the American people. And now it's Democrats saying, hey, you get government out of the way because you're really now imposing your views. So it's just we're living through a major political transition in our country, a major realignment. What one party used to stand for, now the other party's parroting. And by the way, The other transition is that Pennsylvania is the new Florida. Sorry, Connor, this is what it's like to live in the #1 swing state. The first thing you see when you wake up is a political ad, and it's the last thing you see before you go to sleep. Too bad. Deal with it. Better you than us.
Yeah, and people across that state think, what a colossal waste of money. Connor, what do you think about this? Suddenly, we're hearing things about small government, mind your own business, words like freedom and liberty. Those are Republican words, or have been.
That's right. It's a good start. I think I would just keep encouraging the campaign not to forget that inflation hasn't gone away, and the economic concerns of people in the state have not gone away. And where the Democratic Party has always been the strongest is where we're able to maintain a focus on, just the basic dream that each family has to try to save a little bit and get ahead. And so with these rising prices, not just at the grocery store, but on bigger ticket items like insurance or the cost of college education, we need to hear from Vice President Harris on that. She has a record. She has a good story to tell. And I know she has a lot of sympathy for the kind of families that are going through this kind of thing. Because unlike Donald Trump, she wasn't born with a silver spoon in her mouth, and neither was Tim Walz. They've lived the experience of, working hard to get ahead. And I'd like to hear them talking about that just a little bit more.